These are some of the greatest gardens in Britain. From a ducal castle to a garden once lost in time. From a modern masterpiece to a plantsman's paradise. We've searched out the finest in the land. Each has its own unique story to tell.
Oh, it's delightful.
Join me, Carol Klein, on a journey through the 4 seasons. Woo! As I experience a year in their lives. Meet the people who look after them.
This is the season which seems to be attached to my soul.
This is my midlife crisis bit, really.
Glimpse what goes on behind the scenes. Come on, share your secrets. Reflect on their magnificent designs and celebrate the plants that make each so special. As I look through these massive pinnacles of flower, I can see the pinnacles themselves. Serendipity. From up and down the land, these are great British gardens, waiting to be discovered. I'm really looking forward to it. Bet you are too. This is Coton Manor, a 17th century manor house set amidst 10 acres of gardens in the peaceful Northamptonshire countryside. The gardens were laid out in the 1920s by the present owner's grandparents and have been developed by 3 generations of the Paisley-Tyler family. During the past 30 years, they've been designed and gardened by Susie and her husband Ian, who inherited the house from his mother. And despite almost no previous gardening experience, Susie's turned the gardens here into a masterclass in creative, dramatic planting schemes, which keep on delivering all year round. No wonder it's such a huge favourite with its many visitors, including me. I'm starting my visit to Coton Manor in autumn. Susie has made sure that the second you enter, the garden's magic captivates you. This is the main entrance to the garden. So through this wall, through the gate, and wow, look at that. You're distracted straight away by this beautiful perfume. This is actually an autumn flowering clematis, but it's a Chinese species. It's called Clematis rederiana. Rather than having those big flat sepals like most clematis, these are bell-shaped, and inside each one of these, they're loaded with pollen and nectar, and the whole thing is just humming, buzzing with bees, even so late in the year. And on the other side of the entrance, you're bombarded with another sensual delight. It's a pelargonium, and it's called tomentosum, which just means furry. And every bit of this plant is soft to the touch. But it's not just your sense of touch that this plant stimulates. It's also your sense of smell, because if you rub these leaves slightly, you get the strongest smell of peppermint. So on every level, it's a complete delight. I've been lucky enough to know Coton Manor for quite a long time, but my last visit was years ago, so it's thrilling to be back here. The garden really is Susie's garden. She's the huge creative force behind the whole thing. Her husband Ian plays a big role in the organisation and running of the garden, including caring for a noisy collection of wildfowl and poultry. But when it comes to the planting, colour schemes and style of the gardens, that's Susie's domain. Surprisingly, when they came here all those years ago, her gardening experience was very limited. They just had a small London garden. But her gardening knowledge and expertise has grown exponentially. And I think this garden knows its whole character, its whole personality, and this sense of beauty, almost entirely to Susie. I'm beginning my autumn tour on the terrace, the most formal area of the garden, which remains almost unchanged from the days of Susie's mother-in-law, Haroldine. It's glorious. It's so lovely to be back here again.
It's wonderful to have you back, Carol. It really is.
As soon as you come through that gate, this sort of peace descends.
So many people say that they find it therapeutic coming here, and you can sort of almost feel people shedding the stress as they walk through the door.
Yes.
And it's partly this wonderful green space and the horizontal line which sets off the view in the background.
It's very da-da.
Yeah. There are quite a few green spaces, and it just gives you a chance to breathe because there's so much planting. It's a wonderful background for everything, and there are so many greens, even now at this stage of the year in the autumn.
The terrace is home to an abundance of pots, generously planted to reflect the colours in the borders close by. I'm always longing to see what you put in your pots.
Well, it's quite a challenge.
Yeah.
There are a lot of them, but I love doing it.
Yeah.
And they are very effective, especially in the sort of mid to later part of summer.
How many have you got?
It's upwards of 150, I know.
Right, quite a few.
Yes.
It's quite a lot of work, isn't it?
But they're well worth it.
The terrace provides a perfect viewing platform for the garden beyond, including some of Susie's sumptuous borders. To the side of the house are two fairly formal gardens, including the old rose gardens and a huge border, backed by an intriguing old holly hedge. It's a really long border, isn't it?
It is.
What do you call it?
The holly hedge border, for obvious reasons, which was originally there because the vegetable garden, the farmhouse, was the other side, and this was to prevent the animals coming through. And the colours are largely very soft.
Yes.
With the sort of pale blues and pinks.
I think one of the loveliest things is the way you've got these glimpses of red all the way through.
We inherited this rose. There were several of them. And
what's its name?
After a season, it's called Rose of Fred Loads. It struck me that that colour, especially later in the season when the greens have merged, articulates the border.
Yeah.
Because if you suddenly imagine the red's taken out, it would be quite bland.
And then you've got these penstemons too.
It does sort of help give a bit of rhythm to the border, I think.
It's just
it works
perfect. Well. To say Susie is interested in colour would be something of an understatement. And I know there'll be plenty more exciting combinations elsewhere in the garden. Coton Manor garden is made up of many gardens, flowing from the formal stone terrace that adjoins the house, overlooking the old rose garden and the holly hedge border to one side. As the garden extends further from the house, its wide borders and large, sweeping green spaces offer a more informal feel lower down, culminating in a wildflower meadow at the bottom. There's also a woodland garden, and from there, streams trickle down through a water garden into the bog garden. A tinkling stepped rill bisects the old orchard, adding to the sense of tranquility. But at this time of year, it's the tree-studded dell garden that provides a perfect canvas on which to paint the rich colours of autumn. And this is one of my favourite autumnal trees. Isn't it lovely?
It's wonderful.
So Parotia persica, yeah?
That's right.
Otherwise known as the iron tree, because it's got this lovely grey, sort of steely bark, hasn't it? and one of the best things there is
Turning
for,
colour,
for
yes.
autumn colour.
And also it has the merit of being early because it sort of increases the length of time that autumn happens.
Because autumn colour is very gradual,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes.
That's one of the loveliest things about autumn, the way it just...
Doesn't all happen at once.
No. There are wonderful berries too, aren't there?
This is Magnolia sieboldii, which has these wonderful white waxy flowers in early June.
With big purple centres. And they
Exactly right.
droop, don't they, like
So
that?
beautiful. And you can see how many of them there were from the seed heads. But
Yeah.
it does that, and then it does this, and it's just lovely, isn't it?
Oh, it's gorgeous. Make the best pair of earrings.
Wouldn't it? Yes. Carol, I can see you in those.
It may be October, but cleverly thought out succession planting means there's never a dull day at Coton Manor. All over the garden, borders like these, aptly named the red and the blue and yellow borders, are still packed with sensational late summer and autumn herbaceous plants. I'm nearing the end of my autumn visit, but before I go, I'm taking a look at the woodland garden in search of a particular autumn treat that I'm longing to see. This is Cyclamen hederifolium, and they do particularly well under these beech trees. And during the summer, you can't see anything at all. The ground is bare. But then when autumn comes, look at this. And you never ever see these cyclamen individually on their lonesome. You invariably see them in great colonies like this. And that's simply down to the way in which they spread. It's intriguing. These beautiful flowers, which now face downwards, eventually lose their petals, and as they do, the whole stem starts to extend and the seed pod is formed. But then that stem is curled down into a great spring and brought down into close and intimate contact with the soil. When it's ripe, the whole seed pod pops open. The seeds inside, the starch in them turns to sugar, and that attracts ants. The ants move in, carry off the seeds, and on the way back, they drop lots of the seed around. Eventually, you get a whole colony like this, all made by ants. But above all, they just create these beautiful autumnal pictures. These are the stars of the show today, but this woodland retreat will offer different treasures in each season. As the early morning frost glitters in the pale winter sun, nothing stirs in the garden, except waterfowl braving the cold. It's early February here at Coton Manor, and the whole place is a hive of activity. There are so many wonderful plants and combinations. You don't know where to start, and so many of them fit beautifully with the architecture here, with the house, with the walls, with the steps. Here you've got a woodland plant, a polystichum, a lovely evergreen fern that looks pretty pucker all the year round. And so too does this plant behind it. It's a great big gorgeous spurge, Euphorbia coraceus. And it's such a good example of the meticulous care that everybody here takes to ensure that their plants look their very, very best. All the old dead leaves have been removed carefully, and the old dead stems taken out too. So the spurge just looks utterly beautiful. Another example of that kind of care is here, where this clematis is just very carefully tied in and supported with hazel twigs. You don't even notice them at first, but it just means that when this clematis Guernsey cream flowers at midsummer, this will be tumbling over the steps, full of these gorgeous cream flowers. There's such artistry here. It's beautiful. When I visited the woodland garden in autumn, the ground was carpeted with autumn cyclamen. They've totally disappeared now, but just look at the winter display. It's these little beauties that Coton Manor's visitors will be queuing up to see in a week or two. They're absolutely carpeting the ground. And what a picture with this.
This Hamamelis Diane is just such a lovely colour.
It's truly coppery, isn't it?
It is, and it's picking up both the wood chippings on the path, but just the remnants of the beech leaves on these trees.
It works beautifully, it really does. Yes. It really does. So you've been closed, the garden's been closed, but you're going to open for a brief period?
We open in a week's time, just for a fortnight, for people to enjoy snowdrops and hellebores. A lot of people who are familiar with the garden in the summer love to come back and just remind themselves of the sort of structure of it, because it's so apparent now.
Yes.
I think there's everything to look forward to at this time of year.
But one very special snowdrop takes pride of place right here in this sunny spot. This is a really exceptional snowdrop.
Well, someone who claimed to be a snowdrop expert, a galanthophile, visited the garden.
Yeah.
She took it away, discussed it with some other experts, and then they decided that it should be called Galanthus plicatus, which is the wide leaf, I think, isn't it? Ex Coton Manor. So that's what we call it now.
Right. So it's Galanthus plicatus ex Coton Manor.
You've got it.
Yeah. Galanthophiles, which is just this term for people who are daft about snowdrops.
Yes.
There seems to be more and more of them all the time.
I know. I mean, I just love the mass effect, or in this case, the way they're sort of used in this bed. I'm not so interested in the fine detail of every snowdrop, which the collectors are.
Yeah, they certainly are.
I'm a gardener rather than a collector. It's lovely to have different varieties of things, but there are all sorts of other lovely things you want to have as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of winter work to produce Coton Manor's great summer displays. We're off to the midsummer border, where the gardening team is midway through a total overhaul. So everybody's really busy at work.
I know.
So the whole process in here is cutting everything back and then tickling the soil, and at the same time moving anything that needs moving and replanting.
Yes, and if we're doing replanting and the soil isn't satisfactory, we add compost in first.
Yeah.
It's not too bad on the whole here, and it does drain quite well.
Well, things grow beautifully, don't they? I mean, this has grown very well.
It's a herbaceous clematis.
Yeah.
So it doesn't climb like the Viticella clematis, but it gets treated the same way. It gets cut down.
But it will only produce a load of flowers if you've cut it back down hard.
Yes,
which is what we're going to do.
We're going to try. I've got to remove these supports first, and they're probably tied in.
Just use... They are tied in, aren't they?
Yeah.
Clematis are best known as climbing plants. But there are some species that don't twine or climb. These herbaceous clematis need support. And last year, Susie used hazel twigs for this. Now it's time to prune away the old growth and the twiggy supports. So all these little green shoots will spring back into life when we've done this.
Yeah.
By the summer, this clematis will have grown back. An ideal companion for the other plants. A border like this, in fact, anywhere in the garden, it's all about colour and texture and form.
It is, as I sometimes say, like conducting an orchestra, because, if you like, the plants are the instruments, but each of them behaves differently and has to be tuned differently. They need rhythm through a border.
Yeah.
And I tend to restrict the number of plants in a border, or limit them, and repeat them, and the same with colours.
Yeah.
And the same with shapes.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly thinking of in the juxtaposition of plants about those things.
Yeah.
And it's so challenging, but it's such fun.
And it's not just in your head, is it, Susie?
Well, I have got a bit of paper to remind me, because honestly, these notes were done back in July and August. And this is just the ones for this border, because when everything's up, it's easier to see the space. You lose sense of geography once everything's done.
The simple clarity of winter outlines might fool you into thinking the gardens are serenely gliding on towards the spring, when in fact, many feet are madly paddling below the surface. Susie surrounded herself with a brilliant team, including head gardener Richard, who's been at Coton Manor for his entire career. Well, it's like heavy work.
Oh, yes.
Major earthworks, aren't they? Yeah. What are you doing exactly, Richard?
Well, you see the fruit bushes behind me.
I do.
They're a bit past their best now, so we're going to replant some down here. The soil is so bad here that we're taking the topsoil out, removing the subsoil, then putting the topsoil back and putting a lot of compost in with it.
What are you going to be planting? Black currants and gooseberries and...
Black currants, red currants, gooseberries, yeah.
Because they like heavy soil, but not that heavy.
Not that much.
And what will you be putting in first?
Well, we'll put some compost in and root it into the bottom.
Yeah, not muck?
No, not muck. The bushes do better if it's not too rich. When it's too rich, they get a lot of mildew and a lot of vegetative growth and don't put on the fruit, really.
They grow well, but so you want to keep them sort of growing quite hard.
Lean and mean. Yeah.
Lean and mean.
Yeah.
So lots of flowers and consequently loads of fruit. And it's all as a consequence of your doing this right now.
We'll see. Complete team effort, really. We have a great bunch of people working here and we all get on.
How long have you been here?
Well, some folk reckon it's about 40 years now, but I can't quite count that far, so I'm not sure.
Didn't they present you with a medal last year for 40 years service?
Well, yes, gardening beyond the call of duty, I think it was.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave you to it. I was going to join in, but I can see you've got it all under control.
I've got a spare spade if you want one.
Oh, thanks very much. See you later.
Righto.
Good luck with it. Coton Manor now welcomes thousands of visitors to its garden each year, and Susie's husband Ian is busy preparing for their arrival. How long have you been here, Ian?
Yes, well, we're now clocking up 30 years.
Yeah. So at what stage did you decide to open the garden?
Well, we weren't responsible for opening it. My parents opened it in 1968. And great excitement. And I think they got about 5 or 6 people to come and have a look at it.
But you only open during certain months, don't you, Ian?
Yes, it's a seasonal exercise, this one. So we open really from April to September. We have one exception, which is looming now, is to open for hellebores and snowdrops.
Right. Is looming a pertinent word? Is that how you feel?
It is exactly how I feel, because it's a high-risk venture, opening your garden in the middle of February, particularly as the garden's on a slope.
Right.
And people do slip and slide around the place, and they come up into the yard here, having been round the garden, they're covered in mud, and I think, God, I'm going to get an earful about this.
You're the one, aren't you, who organises this whole area?
Behind the scenes, I'm an organiser. I don't get a lot of credit for what's done here, because the garden is everything, and Susie masterminds the garden. I've long since been kicked out of the garden, as all her most precious plants get trodden on by the likes of me.
With plenty of winter work still to do, it's time to leave Ian, Susie and the rest of the dedicated team to get on with it. It's such a tranquil scene here. You can hardly imagine the hard work that's going on over there in the rest of the garden. But when we come again, these snowdrops will be a distant memory. But all sorts of other plants will have burst forth. The whole place will have changed enormously. I'm really looking forward to it. The arrival of longer days and warmer temperatures has encouraged trees and shrubs to flower, and there's an abundance of new growth everywhere. In the woodland garden and the old orchard, spring bulbs abound. But the absolute spring tour de force is unfolding in Susie and Ian's 5-acre beechwood, which, for a few glorious weeks in April, is transformed into a sea of blue. Walking into the beechwood in spring is uplifting, like entering a cathedral, with the soaring columns of the beech trunks and, overhead, the canopy of new translucent lime green leaves unfurling to announce the season. These are our iconic bluebells, Hyacinthoides non-scripta, for centuries an inspiration for poets and painters. Surely one of our most beloved wildflowers, with their deep blue bells held on one side of their elegant drooping stems. Wild colonies are under threat from cross-pollination with the Spanish bluebell, a bigger, coarser plant with upright stems and paler flowers. Our native bluebells are perfect for naturalising in any shady spot, preferably in the shade of deciduous trees. Plant their bulbs 10 centimetres deep in random groups. If left to die down naturally, not only will all the energy from the foliage be reabsorbed by the bulbs, but seeds will make new plants too. But this isn't the only attraction at this time of year. Here in the old orchard gardens, bisected by the stepped rill, apple, pear and damson trees, planted over 100 years ago, are covered in spring blossom, the promise of fruit to come. Beneath them, the orchard is carpeted with cowslips, snake's head fritillaries, and the aptly named tulip, spring green. Next to the old orchard lies the water garden, the tranquil haven of trickling streams that wind their way through the fresh spring foliage. A rich source of pleasure in the autumn and the winter, the woodland garden is again transformed. The cyclamen have given way to spring treasures, such as this Trillium cuneatum, with its rich purply red bracts. And snowdrops have been succeeded by anemone blanda white splendour and erythroniums, many of which will disappear from view entirely as spring ends. The woodland garden is also home to one of Susie's favourite woodland plants.
This is Epimedium sulphureum. It's an exquisitely perfect pale yellow. Pale yellow is a difficult colour to get in the garden in the spring. We treat it by cutting the leaves, which are evergreen, back at the end of January, which allows the flowers to come through first, and then it's followed by this beautiful foliage, which is tinged with red in the early part of the year. And it's one of my favourite woodland plants because it just doesn't need any attention apart from the leaves being cut back in January, and it flourishes in dry shade. What more could you ask?
When Susie and Ian took over the garden, they inherited some well-established plants which continue to thrive today. Perhaps the most spectacular, especially at this time of year, is this 100-year-old wisteria, perfectly displayed against the warm-coloured stone of the house. Its wealth of flowers is maintained by a rigorous pruning regime. In late summer, all the whippy new growth is cut back to 5 or 6 buds from where it grew that year. And again, in winter, it's cut back to 2 or 3 buds. On warm days, the wistaria's fragrance drifts downwards, permeating this little corner by the steps. When I visited in the winter, this clematis, Guernsey cream, was a carefully trained framework of bare stems. Now it's covered in buds and beginning to burst into flower.
You can see it has a little greenish tinge, which is picked up by this euphorbia behind. And in contrast, we've got the purple of the honesty. And complementing the euphorbia, we've got this polystichum fern, which is just unfurling and in its most exciting stage.
As you'd expect, Susie's plant combinations with their balance of colour, form and texture work harmoniously. And her detailed winter maintenance has paid off. I can't wait to see what's in store for summer. Spring has turned to summer at Coton Manor, and I'm thrilled to be back here. Summer is the season when the gardens here at Coton Manor reach their absolute colour climax. The borders are stunning, full of vibrant colour. But it's no accident. Susie and her unstoppable team have been working for hours and hours, every single day, tweaking and making sure that everything is at its absolute best. Susie's disciplined and daring colour combinations are absolutely dazzling. One of the great summer delights of Coton Manor is the abundance of roses, present in every corner of the gardens, from the aptly named rose bank to the shaded slopes of the water garden. Susie, roses play a hugely important part, don't they, at Coton?
I can't imagine summer without roses in this garden anyway. I just love them. There's nothing else that rivals it, really.
Yeah. And this garden, it's called a rose garden, isn't it?
We thought of calling it the Old Rose Garden when we took out the concentration of just roses in this quartered circle. But then people said, where are all the old roses? And so we now just reverted to the Rose Garden.
Yeah. Roses have been planted in this spot since the 1920s. But Susie found they'd started to weaken and die off. Many gardeners find this happening to their ageing roses. Some people call it rose replant disease. Rose replant disease is the idea that when you've been growing roses in the same place for a long time, the soil becomes depleted of different minerals and you can't immediately replant with roses because they don't do well.
You're quite right, it's depletion of minerals.
If you want to replant with new roses, you can try replacing the old soil with fresh to replace the exhausted nutrients. It's also well worth adding a well-balanced organic fertiliser, as well as a generous amount of compost or well-rotted manure. The Coton Rose on the front of the house, I mean, what's its history? How long has it been there?
Well, it's been part of the house for so long, we don't know how long, but it is just stunningly beautiful. And it comes out in one colour and it fades through the 7 different colours, which is why we think it was named the Seven Sisters.
Yeah.
It's just a stunning sight and it belongs to the house.
Yeah.
And we love it. Sometimes you get roses with very long bendy arms and you can tie them down on a sort of framework. It makes a lovely shape. So you get them to about this height and you bend them down and pin them to the ground. And as you do so, you're allowing the sun to reach all the bits and all the buds will break, so you get many more flowers.
What's more, if a rose goes straight up, it flowers at the top.
Exactly.
It's apical dominance,
You're
isn't
quite right.
it?
That's very, very grown up.
So,
yes.
No, but that encourages all those side shoots, all those laterals to
Yes.
produce more flowers.
And it's worth doing, but you do need the roses that have got these long bendy arms. And the 2 that we use are Madame Hardy and Constance Spry. She's a pink one.
One of the points about their versatility is their huge range of colours too.
You're not wrong, Carol. I love colour. It's the final icing on the cake because everything else has to be in place first, but that's what dictates my thinking. And roses are so much part of that because they lend themselves to all sorts of mixed plantings around the garden.
In summer, mixed planting also usually implies copious use of vibrantly coloured flowers. Susie uses loads of perennials all around the gardens at Coton, but the great majority of them are herbaceous. In other words, they disappear under the ground during the winter, but not the penstemons. They're evergreen perennials. They keep all their leaves right the way through the winter. They flower profusely for ages and ages. Although a lot of people would tidy them up during the autumn, cutting back all that top growth, the very best idea is to leave all that top growth on because it will protect all those new shoots that are going to come through in the spring and give you the next season's flower. What's more, they're really easy to propagate. All you need to is find a couple of little side shoots, just pull them off the stem, remove the bottom leaves and put them into a pot of gritty compost. Water them well once, and within weeks they'll have produced roots and new plants. If you've got a sunny spot anywhere and you want it filled with colour all summer long, you could not beat penstemons. The gardens at Coton Manor stretch down from the house to the meadow border at the bottom of the lower lawn. It's been inspired by the real meadow right behind it, which is now at its peak and absolutely brimming with true meadow wildflowers. When you look down from the house, this is part of your view, this beautiful meadow. Now, years ago, this was arable land, but Susie thought, wouldn't it be nice to really blend it into the garden? And that's exactly what they did. You've got beautiful soft grasses down here, and then these taller ones, which just appear as though they're floating over the surface of the whole meadow. And you've got true meadow flowers here. Geranium pretense. Pretense just means of the meadow cranesbill, with these glorious soft blue flowers. That blue blends perfectly right next door to this knapweed. Purple flowers now, and then spots of yellow, lotus and the yellow of white daisies. It's at its absolute peak, crammed full with wonderful flowers. Above the meadow, the gardens slope gently back up towards the manor house, including the resplendent herbaceous borders. In the winter, Susie and her team were working on the midsummer border to prepare for this sensational show of colour. So, Susie, what a difference between the winter and now.
It's hard to believe what's happened in just those few months.
Yeah, it really is. I can remember our pruning, attempting to help you to prune a clematis.
I
What
remember,
happened to
Carol.
that?
Yes, I remember it well. A herbaceous clematis that needs supporting.
Yeah. It's satisfying to see the results of cutting back these herbaceous clematis in the winter. Now they're gloriously twining through their hazel supports.
This particular one will get up to about this height, but it needs supporting. It took a bit of battering in the wind last weekend, but it's fine.
Yeah.
They're terribly underrated, I think, the herbaceous clematis.
Yeah.
And everybody knows the climbing ones, but the herbaceous ones actually give you longer flowering.
So do you find that your preferences for particular borders vary according to what time of year it is?
Absolutely, because I actually do try and get different borders to reach their sort of zenith at different times, because it makes it more interesting.
Right.
And this is one that gives me almost greatest pleasure, I think.
And although it's called a midsummer border, it's going to go on looking great.
It does. It does quite well into the autumn, really.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's also the views through it, which are so lovely.
As you're walking below it or along this
And you can
path.
see the wildflower meadow and the fields beyond. It's just a lovely, lovely aspect.
Yeah.
So I try to plant with views through. I wouldn't want to block that beautiful view.
Susie's meticulous care of all aspects of her garden, from the placing of individual plants to its sympathetic fit with the surrounding landscape, to her adventurous colour palette, creates absolute perfection. And did you ever imagine, when first you came, that this is what you'd see in 30 years' time?
Absolutely not, Carol. I had no idea at all. I was a novice gardener, so it's been, just learning on the hoof. And in some ways, perhaps that's the easiest way if you've got the luxury of time to do it.
What kind of a learning process has it been? Were there things that went wrong over the years?
Oh, all sorts. I mean, you only learn when things go wrong, don't you?
Yeah, it's the best way to learn.
But the thrill of things working when you've thought them through, and even better, when you have the serendipity of things that nature does for you,
Yeah.
that makes you smile,
Yeah.
is hard to express. It's brilliant.
I mean, what does gardening mean for you? Why do you think you do it?
Well, that's a really good question. I've learnt to love it like nothing else, and it's so immensely therapeutic. It's creative, and I never sort of thought of myself as being creative until I started gardening, and that's an interesting discovery. And it gives other people pleasure. So to have something that you do every day that you enjoy, and then to see other people benefit from looking at it and enjoying it, is a double bonus, really.
Yes, it is. And a very, very good reason for creating this beautiful garden and continuing to add to it.
Yes.
I already knew of Susie's reputation as an exceptional plantswoman with a keen eye for colour. But having seen her in action over the last year, I'm absolutely bowled over. It's remarkable to think that a garden of such outstanding beauty and such meticulous maintenance is the work of someone who has absolutely no horticultural training whatsoever. It must have been a daunting task and would have given even seasoned gardeners pause for thought, but not Susie. These gardens are a testament to Susie's courage and her confidence, but much more than that, to the love that she feels for this place. She wants everywhere to look at its very best, day by day, season after season. And I'm sure everybody who visits here knows that she's achieved her aims. That's what makes Coton Manor a truly great British garden.